Were women priests? Yes, they were. They were priests, they were ministers, they were deacons, they were bishops, they were everything and every title you can think of in the early church. It's the disappointing part of church history that has decided to remove women. If you want to find a really, really quick list of the women who were active in the very first churches, all you have to do is go to Romans 16. At the very end of Romans, the letter to the Romans, there is a letter or a list of the people that Paul wanted to thank who were in Rome. Now, the thing about Romans is that this is the only letter he wrote to a church that he did not initiate. If when he was writing to the Corinthians or the other churches, he had been there, so he had a personal relationship with them. Rome, it wasn't that case. He was trying to impress upon them that they should support him and his ministry to Spain. So he had to really ingratiate himself a bit. And one of the ways he did that was thanking the people who were in Rome who would have known him from another time, another place in his ministry. And right off the hop, the very first person we meet, I commend to you our sister Phoebe, a deacon of the church. So the deacons, one of the first group of people who were identified as leaders in the church, they were the ones who were taking care of the money. They were the ones who were setting up the Eucharist, getting the baptized or the converted ready for baptism and helping in those baptisms. They were the ones who were making sure the community had enough to eat, that they had medical needs met, that they had housing needs met. So they were really the workhorses. And Paul trusted Phoebe to take this really important letter from where she was, just outside of Corinth, to Rome to be shared amongst everyone. A little while later, you get down to verse 7. Greet Andronicus and Junia, my relatives who are in prison with me. They are prominent among the apostles. We didn't have just 12 apostles. There wasn't just 70, and there weren't just men. Women were apostles too, and Junia was one of them. Now, one of the interesting yet disturbing things about Junia is that church fathers, the earliest ones, recognized her as who she was, as a woman. But it didn't take long for the church to look at her name and say, no, it wasn't possible for a woman to be appointed to do this job. So they changed her name to Junius, a man's name. So often you'll see Junius in scriptures, maybe with a little asterisk by it, and look at the bottom saying also known as Junia. Two very different genders we're talking about. But again, it's an effort to erase the women involved in the ministry. Going back up a little bit, verse 3, you have greet Prisca and Aquila, who worked with me in Christ Jesus, who risked their necks for my life, to whom not only I give thanks, but also all the churches of the Gentiles. They were teachers. And one of the things that is really kind of cool about Prisca and Aquila is that they're mentioned in the letters to Paul in the book of Acts 6 times. Now, in Acts, she's referred to as Priscilla, which is a nickname. Prisca was her actual name. But when they're mentioned the 6 times, 4 of those times, Prisca is mentioned first, not her husband. So she was actually the more important of the two. And she was a teacher, and that meant that she was responsible for spreading Christian belief wherever she went. She and her husband, I believe, were tent makers like Paul. So they got around, and they were part of the group of people who was expelled from Rome when it burned, and Nero decided to blame that on all of the early Christians and the Hebrews who were in Rome. There's others. Verse 6, it says, greet Mary, who has worked hard among us. There's others who talking about the house churches they had. There's quite a number of women and men mentioned in Romans 16. The thing was, the early church had women working and men working. There was no distinction. And this assumption in 2021 that we still have to have this conversation, it's just mind-boggling. Women scholars have been working on this for at least 4 decades, probably longer. The evidence is there, the statuary is there, the funeral markers are there. Very definitely, without hesitation, yes, women were priests and bishops and deacons and apostles and everything you can think of in the early church. Women were part of. And it's something we should learn in 2021. that gender and identity should not bar us from leadership, anybody, because they didn't stop people in the early church. All they cared about was, were you in the spirit? Did you have the emotional strength? Did you have the intellectual understanding? Were you driven by the spirit? Were you wanting to share Jesus' message? That's the only litmus test that was used. I think we can learn something.